Hey everyone, it's Mark from Flight Sim School. With the release of the 777 finally upon us, I thought it might be interesting to have a closer look at the Trustmaster TCA yoke today, and I'm going to address the things that I would have liked to know before I bought mine with regards to mounting, customizing, and configuring it. And most importantly, we're going to look at who this device is best suited for, because it can do a whole lot more than just fly airliners. I've spent almost a year with this thing, flying everything from the C-152 through to the 747, and there's no doubt that it's a fantastic and versatile device, but it's important to be aware of all of the pros and cons before you buy something so pricey, so let's look at all of that now. First off, there's only one way really to install it, by slotting it onto your desk with what amounts to being a C-clamp. And one concern that I had with it was if it would even fit my desk, because I've got a metal lip right at the edge of it that I'd have to get around somehow. The official diagram from Thrustmaster says that it supports desks up to 55mm thick, even though the opening is a little bit bigger than that. Because of those rubbery ends to the screws that hold it in place, you end up losing a little bit even when they're fully unscrewed. What I discovered though is that within each of those rubbery ends, there's a tiny set screw which you can remove if you have the right hex key size, and that'll give you a little bit of extra space for a total of 64.7mm, which on my desk turned out to make all the difference. Now, once you actually have it installed on your desk, regardless of if you've had to remove the rubbery bits or not, you're quickly going to realize that it is annoying to take this thing on and off your desk all the time. So I think one of the main criteria for getting this thing is to have a big enough desk that you can just always leave it mounted and slide it over whenever you want, because that'll make it much easier to jump into flight sim quickly. My desk is 60 inches wide, so there's enough space for me to have the yoke and all my other flight sim gear off to the side, but any less than that and I think I would start to feel a little bit too cramped, especially if you're like me and you use this space most of the time to do your real job rather than flight sim. There is also a stand that you can use to hold a tablet or checklist, but I don't find it super useful just because if you put anything too big there, it's going to block the bottom of the screen, which obviously isn't great for seeing your instrument panel. The interior of the yoke is an all aluminum build, but the outside is still just plastic. And one thing that I picked up watching V1 simulations is that you can wrap it in tennis tape to improve the plasticky feel that you get when you're holding it, and it feels a lot more grippy this way as well. It's only about $10 on Amazon for a pack of 3 grips, and if you don't like it, you can always remove it because there's no adhesive to tennis tape. It's really just held on by tension. But for me personally, there's no going back. I like it way better this way. The other thing that you're going to want to do if you're mostly flying airliners to improve the feel of it is to add the last spring that they provide in the box for it. I initially ignored this just to get it up and running fast, but from what I've heard from watching real Boeing pilots using it, that stiffer feel is definitely a lot closer to the real thing. There's just 2 hex screws that you need to remove on the chassis so that you can access the interior springs, and the whole process won't take you more than 10 to 15 minutes, especially if you're using a good pair of pliers. That'll go a long way to making it easier to install it. So the big selling point of this yoke is that it has a pendular motion rather than the push-pull that other yokes do, and what that gives you is the ability to be a bit more precise in your movements, and you can feel the tension as you're moving it around a lot better. Because of that pendular motion though, it means that the yoke sticks out a fair bit from your desk, and it's actually going to sit just above you when you're flying, which isn't uncomfortable, but it definitely feels a little weird the first few times you try it, but you get used to it and it's really not a problem. Once you actually plug it in, Flight Sim does have a default layout that works okay to get you started, but I still ended up creating my own profile to customize a couple of things. And for the most part, I've ended up using the same profile for almost all planes, although as we're going to see, there is a fair amount of flexibility for you to configure some things on a per plane basis. In terms of buttons and switches, on the top right and left we have 2 buttons, one for the autopilot master switch and the other I use to reset the view to a custom camera view that I use for flying the airplane. I use the 2-way buttons on the left and the right to control the different trim surfaces, but if you're flying an airplane with only an elevator trim, then you could use them for something else, although it does make it a little bit harder to remember what you've bound it to. I use the two hat switches for controlling the cameras. The right one is a free moving one and it's mapped to look around the cockpit, which is the primary way I look around when my Tobii eye tracker is off. But the left hat switch, on the other hand, has specific directions that you can press it rather than being free moving. So I use that one to just quickly access my 4 most used camera views, which to be honest is often going to be wing views to get some cool screenshots. On the back of the unit, there's 2 buttons as well, which have a lot of travel to them before you get to the actual button press. And this is one of my only complaints about the device. Even though I used one of these buttons for my push to talk on VATSIM, at first I often either wasn't pressing it strongly enough to talk, or otherwise I would be flying and talking and it accidentally come loose because you need to keep a fair amount of pressure on it to keep it depressed. There's another set of buttons down at the front, and if you're on PC, you can use them for whatever you want. But on Xbox, these are going to be set to the default menu buttons. But personally, even though I am on PC, I don't use them for anything, even though I could change it. We've got a gear lever on the right-hand side, which has a really nice thumping sound to it when you move it up and down. But unlike the 737, it only has 2 positions, so it doesn't have the off middle position, so you still need to reset that by hand using the mouse. There's also 2 axes down at the bottom, which if you don't have any other throttle quadrant, they can work for your throttle or even your prop controls. Although I find they're in a little bit of an awkward place to reach when you're actually flying, especially if you're coming into land. You need one hand up top on the yoke and another down below to handle both controls at once. We're going to touch on this in the next and last section of the video, where we're going to look at who this yoke is actually best suited for. There's 2 different ways you can buy this yoke, either standalone with just a yoke, which retails for $3.99 US, or you can buy it in a pack with the throttle quadrant, which comes out to $4.99. I only got the yoke rather than the yoke plus throttle combo since I already have a Honeycomb Bravo, which gives me all of the versatility I need in terms of a throttle quadrant. But if you don't have another throttle already, I'd recommend getting the combo pack, because although you can use the axes that are at the bottom of the yoke to get you started, it's still not that great. And for only $100 more, you get a throttle that's worth $150 on its own. Now, obviously, this thing is targeted at flying Boeings like the 737, the 777, and so on, but it works perfectly well for other yoke-based airliners like the BAE 146, the A300, the Learjet, or anything else that you might have in your hangar. Even though GA planes don't have a pendular motion like this one does, I find it still works perfectly fine for flying anything from a C-152 through to a King Air, and really the only planes I don't think it's well suited for are those with side sticks rather than yokes. Speaking of which, if you like flying a lot of modern Airbuses or military jets, you're still going to want to have a side stick of some kind for those planes, because it just doesn't feel right to use a yoke for them, but it would still work if that's all that you've got. The first time I took off and landed with this thing was one of the coolest experiences in flight sim that I've had in a really long while, and you just feel so much more connected to the flight using a high-end peripheral like this one. I've had 0 issues with mine with what I would say is a medium level of use, and even after a full year of using it, the novelty of it hasn't worn off at all, and it's just so much fun to go flying with it. So it almost goes without saying that I highly recommend this device. The only caveat that I would put on it is if you're a beginner who's only just starting to explore the world of flight sim, I'd wait until you get a feel for the types of airplanes that you actually like flying first before getting something so expensive. I absolutely love this thing, to the point that I've almost stopped flying Airbus entirely just because the experience with this yoke is second to none, and I'm sure that you'll find the same if you end up getting one as well. On top of that, if you combine this yoke with a quality throttle quadrant, you end up with a pretty slick solution for flight sim without going the full sim pit approach. So I'll actually leave you today with a link to my best airliners for beginners video, because you're definitely going to want to try one of those out when you get this yoke. And make sure that you like and subscribe on your way out to get more videos like this one.